Thank you. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, members of the literary community, and I imagine that members of the author, to whose fold the author joined recently. I hope they are here as well. Nigerians and friends of Nigeria, fellow Africans, and lovers of ideas. Good evening. For me, it is both an honor and a profound responsibility to stand before you today to launch what I consider one of the most important Nigerian novels of recent years, particularly out here in Belgium and in Europe, and indeed in the entire diaspora. The City He Never Returned To is not simply a novel. You must have gleaned that from the clip that you watched, but also the introductory statements that the author made. From where I am standing, it is a mirror, it is a ledger, and it's no coincidence that I'm using the word ledger because I'm borrowing from the words of the author. It is, above all, a conversation. And perhaps most importantly, this novel is an invitation to revisit a chapter of our collective history that remains unfinished, an invitation to imagine what healing might look like if we summoned sufficient courage to pursue it, an invitation to move beyond remembrance towards repair. Before I speak about this book, permit me a brief personal reflection. I come to this conversation not merely as a reader, an analyst, or keynote speaker. In more ways than one, I am a war child. When the Nigerian Civil War broke out, I was still a toddler. Like many children of that generation, my memories are not arranged as historical facts or, political arguments, the types you read in, history or political books. They survive instead as fragments. The society in, the anxiety in the adult voices, the sudden silences when, certain subjects arose, the cautious way people spoke about the future, and the lingering awareness that something profound had happened to our country and to the people around us. As I grew older, I came to understand that while some people experienced the war on the battlefields, many of us experienced it in memory, in inheritance, and in its long shadows. We inherited stories, we inherited grief, we inherited caution, we inherited questions that were never fully answered. That is why this novel resonates with me so very deeply. I'm not a distant observer, looking back at history through the comfort of archives. I am part of a generation shaped by the afterlife of that history, a generation that grew up among survivors, a generation that learned that wars do not always end when the guns fall silent. Sometimes they continue quietly, in memory, in institutions, in relationships, and in stories nations tell themselves about who belongs and who does not. Perhaps that is why I find the central proposition of this book so compelling. It is not a content, merely to remember. It dares to ask what comes after memory. It dares to ask how a nation heals. It dares to ask how survival can become repair and how repair itself can become renewal. The author, Ibekwe Paul Chukwuemeka, tells us in this author's note that this novel began not with a plot, but with a question. And please allow me to quote him. And I will not be quoting him copiously because I intend for you to consider this a teaser and you find out and read the actual quote yourself. But allow me to take up, one liner there. How does a nation live with a past that refuses to become past? Unquote. That question sits at the heart of this remarkable work. For many Nigerians, particularly those whose families carry memories of the Civil War, the past has never truly become past. It survives in silence. It survives in inherited fears. It survives in caution, in suspicion, in stories told under the mango trees, at the Ogwa in the village square, around dining tables and family gatherings. It survives in memories that official history often struggles to accommodate. What makes this novel extraordinary is that it refuses to become trapped in grievance. Instead, it dares to ask a more difficult question. What comes after survival? The Emeka Ibekwe's answer is both bold and original. He calls it, and listen to this, speculative repair. In his words, and I quote, not copiously but sparingly, what if we treated this national healing not as a mysterious affair of the heart, but as the most complex and most worthy engineering project of our lifetime, unquote. That single sentence may well become one of the defining intellectual contributions of this book. Because throughout history, societies have often spoken about reconciliation as an emotional process. But this novel is different. This novel challenges us to think differently. It suggests that healing is also institutional, that memory, requires archives, that justice requires documentation. It tells us that reconciliation requires accountability, and that nation building requires deliberate design. It's not happenstance. As someone whose professional and intellectual life has increasingly focused on economic diplomacy, governance, and institutional development, I find this idea deeply compelling. Nations do not become stronger because, they forget. They become stronger because they learn how to remember responsibly. That is why one of the central symbols in this novel is not a weapon, not a politician, not even a battlefield. It is a ledger. The ledger carried by Okechukwu Nwankwo, whose character or persona is recognizable in the Okebani of our different families. A simple book of records, a record of assets, a record of losses, a record of names, a record of existence itself. At one point in the novel, Okechukwu says, again quoting, "If we lose the record of what we have, we lose the proof of who we are," unquote. That statement speaks not only to one family, it speaks to nations, not even a nation. Because nations too require ledgers, ledgers of truth, ledgers of memory, ledgers of accountability, because without them, history becomes vulnerable to manipulation and societies become vulnerable to repetition. one of the most moving passages in the book appears in the dedication where Emeka writes, "The opposite of war is not just peace, but the difficult daily work of rebuilding something worthy of the survivors," unquote. Please, just allow me to repeat that, and I'm sure you would find out in the book. The opposite of war is not just peace, but the difficult daily works of rebuilding something worthy of the survivors. That is, in my books, profound political statement. And I know a thing or two about politics because I was in municipal politics out here in Ostend, Belgium, for 18 good years. And perhaps an even deeper moral one is this, because too often we celebrate the end of conflict while neglecting the harder work that follows. The work of rebuilding trust, the work of rebuilding institutions, the work of rebuilding relationships, the work of rebuilding shared futures. Emeka, the author, reminds us that survival alone is not enough. A nation owes its survivors something more. It owes them dignity, it owes them recognition, it owes them inclusion, and it owes future generations a better inheritance. What particularly impressed me about this novel is that it refuses easy binaries. And I say this as someone who had the privilege of being one of the first to read the book. And as of today, I've read it back to back, and I'm restarting during our next summer vacation in Nigeria. It does not seek to inflame. It seeks to understand. It does not seek victory. It seeks healing. The book does not seek separation. It seeks a stronger basis for coexistence. In the introduction, the author, Emeka, writes, and I quote, "You cannot repair what you will not first acknowledge." This is true of families. It is true of institutions, and it is true of nations. Across the world, societies have successfully confronted difficult histories, have not done so, by pretending those histories never happened. They have done so by acknowledging. And what did they acknowledge? They acknowledged them honestly. Germany did not become stronger by forgetting. South Africa did not become stronger by denying. Rwanda did not become stronger by silence. Every society that has healed has first found the courage to look directly at its wounds. Nigeria is no exception. Nigeria should not be an exception. Yet, the beauty of this novel is that it does not stop at diagnosis, okay? I mean, that's what doctors do. They diagnose as the basis for accurate prescription. And the book has prescriptions, or like many. Many books tell us what is broken. Few attempt to imagine what repair might look like. This one does. And that is why I believe the city he never returned to belongs to an emerging tradition of literature that does more, that does more than remember history. It seeks to shape the future, and we only need to read a few chapters to get a grasp of what I'm talking about. As a first-generation Nigerian migrant who has spent decades living in Europe, while remaining emotionally and intellectually and professionally connected to Nigeria, I found another aspect of this book deeply resonates. The author writes from Brussels. He writes from distance, yet he writes with intimacy. He demonstrates that distance need not distinguish belonging. Indeed, sometimes distance actually sharpens perspectives. Sometimes it allows us to see patterns that proximity actually obscures. Sometimes it allows us to imagine possibilities that entrenched positions actually dismiss. The diaspora has, often been described as a source of remittances. Yes, that's correct. The novel, however, reminds us that the diaspora is also a source of ideas, a source of memory, a source of imagination, and sometimes, a source of national self-reflection. So, ladies and gentlemen, at its core, this book is an act of hope. Not naive hope, not sentimental hope, not, disciplined hope, the kind of hope that understands pain, the kind of hope that acknowledges loss, the kind of hope that recognizes injustice, that still chooses to believe in the possibility of a shared future. The author closes his introduction with these words. The discussion begins not in the hall of power, but in the imagination, unquote. How true. Every institution was once an idea. Every policy was once a conversation. And I know this because I work in the intersection of policy and strategy as of now. Every reform was once an act of imagination, and every better future begins with someone daring to imagine it. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, Ibekwe Paul Chukwuemeka, simply Emeka to us, his friends, has done precisely that. He has given us more than a novel. He has given us a framework for conversation, a vocabulary for healing, a language of repair, and a challenge. The challenge is whether we are prepared to, engage, whether we are prepared to honestly engage with the questions he raises. And there are quite, a few questions in this novel. Whether we are prepared to move from memory to understanding, from understanding to empathy, from empathy to repair, and from repair to renewal. I congratulate the author for this remarkable achievement. Allow me to call it an opus. I commend Akajiofo Press for bringing this important work into the public domain. And I encourage every reader not merely to read this book, but to study it and to wrestle with it. Discuss it, debate it, question it. The author has thrown an open invitation to us in his remarks that whether you are a book club or a small group or, sympathizers of IPOB or whatever it is that you are, he is just a phone call away. Seize on that opportunity, because the future it imagines ultimately becomes not to the author alone, but to all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I formally present and celebrate the launch of the city he never returned to. May it travel widely, may it provoke thoughts, may it inspire dialogue, and may it contribute in its own important way to building a Nigeria and indeed an Africa worthy of those who survived and worthy of those yet to come. Thank you.
I guess I trust my instincts. And you delivered, you delivered more than and more than and more than. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I couldn't do what you did. To each to his own. Everybody has his talent, and we know that, and we should recognize that. So I recognize your talent, and I'm very grateful that you are here with us to showcase that talent. Thank you very much. Indeed. You're welcome.